Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Roundtable Chat series. Today, I'm going to be joined by Andrea Garson, who's the Vice President of Human Resources for Cardinal, I'm going to get this wrong, Cardinal Health Canada. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is really one of those nebulous feedback topics that people get a lot, which is you need to increase your professional presence. And I hear a lot of that from our clients, and members that I talk to on a regular basis is, this kind of feedback that we're given, Andrea, it's one of these things that leaders will toss it off. They'll say things like, oh, leaders cast a long shadow, and, you need to think about your presence when you're in the room. And that doesn't really give people enough. So could you, I'd love to hear your perspective. How do you break down, if somebody were to be on the receiving end of that feedback, how would you break it down for them in terms of what they might need to think about or want to think about?
It's actually fun. You often see people giving feedback and then they say, enhance your professional presence, but then they don't give you examples of what that looks like. And I think that's where people struggle. But it is a broad issue. So I think that it is something that people generally either have or they don't have, but it is something that you can try and develop or evolve. So if I had to try and define it to someone, if I was giving them feedback, I would think about how do you conduct yourself? How do you carry yourself relative to your communication style? And communication is both verbal and nonverbal. I would say probably nonverbal is even more important. Your attitude and your level of engagement that you would have in a dialogue or in a room or in a meeting or in the situation that you're in.
Yeah, I think that, often we spend a lot of time at work talking to people about what they need to do, but not as much time talking about how they need to do it. And those how conversations can be kind of uncomfortable, if somebody's not wearing the right outfit or, how do you talk about that? And I can remember actually in my career, at one point, my boss sitting me down and saying, okay, I'm going to give you some money to go and upgrade your wardrobe, which was great for me. I got a spending spree. But it was very interesting the way he kind of approached that conversation, because I was working in a place where I was working at a consulting firm. I'm pretty casual. I'm fairly informal. And yet, a lot of our clients were these very, blue chip, tight clients. And so, if I looked around and I looked at my colleagues, I had a lot of colleagues who, they had the top suits and the right haircuts and all of those kinds of things. And I think that was my boss's way of saying, you need to upgrade, your look. How do you how would you suggest somebody go around actually giving that feedback? Because I think, I took that fairly well. I had a good relationship with my boss. So, plus I got spending money to go and shop and buy a new suit. So it was all good for me. But how would you suggest people approach a conversation that could be around how somebody's dressing or showing up? Because I think all of those things, are, to your point, tie into that professional presence piece.
It really does, and that type of feedback is incredibly difficult, and I'd say one of the areas where most managers lack the capability of doing it. So a couple things. I think no matter what type of feedback you're giving, it's always best to give examples. So if there's a way to point out somebody else in the company that just has the, I don't want to call it the look, because there's no specific look, but sort of the presence that we're trying to get to. If you can point out to this person that look, and the way they carry themselves, and presumably you're picking somebody who also has that broader integrity, and people look up to them in the organization, and they speak with examples, and they have strong communication. The presence piece or the look will tie into the whole package. So I would try and bring examples. And I think there sometimes is a challenge when there's the male-female piece. So if it's speaking to a male, I think a male or a female is probably more okay to give that feedback. But sometimes when you're giving that feedback to a female, it may be better coming from another female. Because sometimes the man will struggle to give it objectively, or will come across not objective, even if they're completely innocent and trying to help their professional presence. So I think thinking about who's delivering that message, and then being able to give examples of, look at this person, look at how they attract attention, look at how they draw people in their conversation. And you don't see them coming in dressed like X, or just giving examples of that, I think, is helpful. Because I do think that it doesn't really matter what you're wearing, it's kind of how you wear it, and then everything else that goes around what you're wearing. So for example, in our organization, we just declared the other day, at least for the month of February and potentially ongoing, we're going to be casual now, we're going to be jeans. And that's very, it's not common in the healthcare industry. But we also realize that, you know, when you're not in front of customers necessarily, when you're in the office engaging with each other, it really doesn't matter what you're wearing. It's all the other stuff that goes with that makes the difference.
Yeah, and you know, and I think it's funny though, because you know, I used to work from home, and somebody said to me when I was working from home, you know, don't work in your pajamas. You need to get up and get dressed and feel like you're going into the office. And I have to say, there's some truth to that. So always, you know, I think I wonder about, you know, sometimes this. I don't know, maybe I'm going to date myself, but I do wonder sometimes, you know, the professional, like my father never owned a pair of jeans, you know, back in the day, always wore a tie every day. And I wonder if, you know, there's something about standards that maybe we're missing out on. I don't know. I mean, not that I wear a suit every day, that's for sure, but it's kind of interesting, this movement that we're moving away from formal in look, right?
Yeah, it depends on where you are and the context of which you're in. Because, you know, when I dress up, when I wear my suits, or when I wear, you know, a nice outfit, you do carry yourself differently, you do feel differently, and therefore you're going to emulate differently. But then again, you wear a nice pair of jeans and you wear a blazer and a shirt with that, you feel pretty smart as well. Like, you look smart, you feel confident, as long as you're comfortable in what you're wearing. I think that's it. And, you know, comfortable doesn't mean wearing your jeans and your sweatshirts or your sweatpants. Because we will approach things differently dressed like that. So this morning, I'm at home. You can probably tell by the red walls. I'm at home today, and I thought about, okay, what top am I going to wear? Because I could have put on a blazer, but I otherwise probably would have put on a sweatshirt. So I wore something that I knew would help me speak on the more professional side than on the casual side today.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's funny because I was thinking, as we were talking, I was thinking about Steve Jobs, you know, who just was the black turtleneck and jeans guy, and yet he walked on that stage and he was commanding that stage. Now, I think you in HR, I mean, I think one of the things that I love sort of talking to people who are in the HR line, because you sort of look at talent and people through a different lens, and you've worked in a number of places. Curious if there's anything that you would say is just sort of common to people who just naturally have that professional presence that we've been talking about. Like, are there any behaviors or ways that they approach, you know, boardrooms or stages that you could just say, you know what, I could boil it down into 2 or 3 things that somebody should think about.
Yeah. There definitely is an environment to me that is really when it comes to the professional presence. I think the level of engagement that you have when you're in the room or in the discussion makes a big difference. So are you listening? Are you responding? Like, look, you're nodding while I'm speaking, so you're engaged. But the nonverbal cues, and you know, I'm working with somebody who is lacking professional presence, and one of the things that they keep doing is they'll roll their eyes when they hear what somebody's saying that they don't like, or they'll disengage and they'll look away, or they'll shake their head, not at the person, but in the room. So everybody else sees that. So it's the way you're conducting yourself, especially in the nonverbal way, that portrays your level of engagement or your presence in listening to someone. Making eye contact is also another key area where you're showing that you're there, you're present, you're listening. I think folks that portray professional presence also are really good at giving and receiving feedback. So people will seek them out to ask for their advice. And they're not going to seek somebody out who they think doesn't have that polish or that experience. And you're only going to really get that by hearing what they have to say or watching the way they interact with other people. So I think as simple as being open to providing feedback to others and getting that feedback. And a big thing is confidence in communication. So when you get up in front of a room, whether it be a room of 2, 20, or 200 people, you have to have that confidence in what you're saying. So if you're going to be speaking about topics that you're not familiar with, then you need to become very familiar with it, because that will get people to believe in you, believe in what you're saying, and want to hear more about it. But if you are not communicating with confidence, you aren't coming across to have that professional presence that I think people are going to look for in a leader. I would just add one more thing: being human. when you can tie things back to your personal life, what you're willing to share, giving examples to people so they understand what it is you're saying instead of just speaking words, just being human and bringing it down to the personal really helps people engage with you, trust you, and see you as a leader.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I think, it's interesting because I was chatting with one of our members who has been given this feedback, and I was actually observing a colleague of his who I think it's interesting. Professional presence, sometimes professional presence is, you're not bringing enough presence to the table. And I think, sometimes people who are introverted, who tend to hold back and be more of the observer, that behavior can be construed as a lack of, presence and lack of things to say, lack of engagement. It can, all of those things sort of the counter to, what you just said, sometimes if you're somebody who's a little bit more reserved. The other thing though too is like, there's somebody who I work with who is almost the opposite of that. He's so casual, like if he was here, he'd be sitting back and he'd be chewing his gum. And I was having a conversation about the fact that, that kind of undermines your credibility though, like an incredibly smart person. But I think that the first impression that people have when they initially see him is of somebody who's, maybe a little too cocky, maybe not that engaged. And it's almost like, a professional presence, I think that in terms of, you can either be almost on, like you've got too much presence that's like, it's not professional, it's cocky and arrogant and that side, or you can be, the sort of withdrawn, quieter person. And when I've talked to both people on both sides of the spectrum, and I'll say to them, think about a little bit about, either putting yourself forward more, or in the case of the person who's, being too casual and too relaxed, think about sitting up a little straighter, think about wearing a jacket when you go into the meeting. And I get often this pushback that, well, that doesn't feel authentic. That's not me. What's your response to that?
It's a fine balance. It's not an easy answer because I do believe in being true to myself. You need to know who you are, you need to know what your comfort zone is, and if you step too far out of that comfort zone, you are going to actually come across the opposite of confident and poised and professional. But that being said, I hear your message around, if you're slouching back in your chair. I actually tend to be a sloucher, unfortunately. I don't have good posture at all. So I think you combine it. So if you know that you may be more casual, you may be a sloucher, you have to counter that with some other things. So when you finally say something in that room or in that group, you want it to have impact. So people might go, oh, okay, well, maybe they are listening and maybe they do have a point of view as opposed to the way they look. But I do think there's probably this happy medium. So I try to, when I find myself slouching, I find myself, oh, wait, sit up a little bit more. But if you're making eye contact, if you're responding to what the other person is saying, if you're participating in a professional and insightful way in the dialogue, I suspect that people can get back past that pretty quickly. And then the flip side is, you go too far to the extreme of dressing up in suits, and you'll see somebody who's always kind of loosening their tie because it's too tight, or if you're wearing a skirt, a woman's kind of shifting her legs every 10 minutes because she's not comfortable having her legs crossed all the time. So it's finding that balance in being true to yourself, knowing who you are, being in your comfort zone, but acknowledging the reaction or the impact that what you're doing can have on other people and making slight modifications. But it is more about what you're saying, having that level of engagement, being present in the discussion, and saying things of impact. I think that should overshadow some of the other casual things.
That's great. All right, well, Andrea, thanks so much for joining us today for this edition of Roundtable Chat. And for all of you watching, if you'd like to learn more about Andrea's point of view on this topic, as well as a couple of other mentors, be sure to check out the links below on this YouTube channel and visit our website at www.theexecutiveroundtable.com. Next month, we are going to be talking about those pesky millennials in the workplace and how we can engage them a little bit more. So thank you all for tuning in. And Andrea, thanks so much for joining me today.
Happy to. My pleasure.
Okay, take care.
Okay.
Happy leading, everybody.